Good afternoon. It is now time to move on from week 5 to week 6, and we are rapidly approaching the end of the course. Really, there's only 3 weeks left, and there's been a lot covered so far, and there's still quite a bit to go. So, as usual, I'd just like to review where we were last week and where we're going. And this week, I think it's really easy to see the progression. Last week, you spent time with the text where it talked about how organizations approach change and concepts like evolutionary versus revolutionary change. And then you had a discussion that was all about essentially an organization that either couldn't, wouldn't, but definitely didn't change. And look what's happened. So the Sears discussion, I think, is always an interesting one when it comes up. For somebody of my vintage, I remember Sears as a very obviously healthy company. It was the dominant retailer. Now it's an afterthought. And as I said in a couple of my responses to people, it's to the point where I think Sears may be their passing may be mourned, but they really won't be missed, because what you saw was a company really that ceased to provide value, and it didn't keep up with what its competition was doing, what its market was demanding, and how people want to receive value. And that was, I think, one of the biggest points. So the discussion was very good. It was very lively, and I appreciate that. What I do want to say, though, and it may have come across in a couple of instances, I want people to make sure that we understand one of the things that we're looking for in there is sort of a factor of timeliness. And timeliness in the idea of what's going on in the world, today. And for those who just kind of read the question and went on what you remembered of Sears, we came up with some answers every once in a while that bordered on highly improbable, shall I say that. So one thing I did try to do, and hopefully I did it in a respectful manner, was to re-inject some realism into some of these things. Think of when you make a recommendation about a company or a maneuver that you'd like to see. Think of all the implications. One of the things I think that I hope we were able to understand in this unit was, well, you say, well, I would do X, Y, and Z. And then not realize maybe that X, Y, and Z are just not doing things. It requires marshaling some resources, perhaps even some investment. And I tried to point out the difference between financial investment and other types of investment. But the whole idea is change is a very, very difficult process and revolves around so many factors. That's what makes it hard to do. And I think the one thing we say all the time, right, it's a cliche, that the one thing that is constant is change. And particularly in the time that we have gone through in the last 10 months, 12 months with the pandemic, change is going on around us at a more rapid pace than we realize, because everything seems to have slowed down. But that's going to mean that we began to do things differently, and now we don't know if we'll continue them, or whether we'll discover that they were good processes or bad processes. We don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. And as organizations and as individuals, we're going to have to deal with that. So it's a very, very important unit, and some of the concepts in there are things we should really take to heart and keep in mind as we go forward. Now, as we go into Unit 6, well, we're moving into an idea of organizational and individual learning. What good is getting all this experience of the past 10 months, 12 months, as I just said a moment ago, if we don't learn something from it? And as individuals, I think we have a fairly good idea of how we learn, but do we understand really how organizations learn? Do they become what we call learning organizations? How do they deal with problems, and how can they position themselves not to be the next Sears? So this is an important one. Again, this is a very, very deep concept, and it requires everyone to think in stages. It's kind of like throwing a stone into a quiet pond. The ripples are going to come out. How many ripples can you count? Don't know. But it's certainly got to be more than one, and that's what we look for. So that's where we are. This is week 6. Heads up, as it is written in the course, the main paper, the big paper for the organization, comes next week. in week 7. So make sure that you're ready for that, because that week 7 written assignment is worth a big chunk of your grade. It's worth 30%. So that's one thing I want you to start preparing for that. And the other thing, now's the time to make sure you're caught up. If you're a little bit behind, try to get caught up. If you are caught up, stay caught up. Don't fall behind, because that time pressure could come to bear more than any other time next week. Okay, so another successful week, I believe. Keep building on what you've come from each week to week to week, and let's see how we do with the idea of organizational learning. Thank you very much.